Welcome everyone to CDO's magazine series of one-on-one interviews with CDOs, data leaders, and key influencers. You're listening to Robert Lutton, Vice President Central Consultants, and I'm coming to you today from Toronto, Canada. Working with the CDO magazine, MIT CDO IQ Symposium, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers, today I'd like to introduce Besa Buddha, who is the Chief Data Officer at MercyFirst. Welcome, Besa.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to have this conversation and, sharing a little bit about our experiences at MercyFirst, as well as my experiences and how I got here.
The pleasure is all ours, I can assure you. And if I may, you've got a fantastic background. It's a very impressive background in research. And I'd like to start with a background question to introduce you to our audience. Looking at your background, it appears you've got an extensive career in research. Could you tell us what brought you first to data and then second to MercyFirst?
Absolutely. So research and data are kind of synonymous together in a way. The data is a key component for research and vice versa. So my experience, and just many years of graduate school, number one, has given me sort of a really good insight regarding, data systems. And it was a natural progression from just the research part, moving more into the data science part. So initially what, 10 or 20 years ago, what we call statistics or advanced mathematics or analytics was the realm that, pretty much the researchers used to play in. And then in the past few years, it has a new moniker called data science, but we have been doing this for many, many years. It's just now we have different tools that can automate a lot of these processes much better and get us the insights much quicker. But some of the underlying algorithms, including some of the processes related to data science or analytics, are based on earlier types of processes that were around since the 70s, actually.
So moving from statistics and advanced mathematics into data, how has data specifically been able to help you in your research? And your day-to-day roles and the research? Obviously, you were just mentioning that you're just coming from meeting with researchers. So how has data been able to change that from the times gone before?
So I think there's a new focus, the new moniker. Data is, like a new shiny object, currently. But data has always been, key to all the research that we have done. Any sort of research that I would do, the first thing you need to think about is the research design, the data collection process, basically the soup to nuts regarding what you need to do to ensure that an experiment is successful. With a priori assumptions regarding, what elements, what different components you need to collect to study a certain outcome. So let's say I want to study health, or I want to study mental health, or, whatever it is. Let's say I want to study diabetes. From the earlier on, I would have to come up with the research questions, to answer. If somebody does an exercise, are they more likely, more predisposed to be diabetic? And what as a researcher, I would have to think about all the different variables that I would have to measure to ensure that I'm answering the research questions that I have set out to answer. But also thinking about each element that has to be answered. And number two, what are the best approaches to collect the data? How do I store that data? How do I analyze that data? And how do I come up with insights, to answer that question? We do this now all the time. If you think about electronic health records, they were set with more of a clinical purpose in mind. And basically that is to provide the services. Actually, original, EHR schemes were primarily set for billing, not necessarily for research purposes or for data science purposes. And same thing with a lot of our, additional systems in finances. They were not, set up with a mind of, looking at insights as far as, what the potential opportunities would be, target a certain client. They were set originally to ensure that they were tracking a service, number one, but there is an audit record, number two. And as those systems mature, but also as we've gotten much more sophisticated, there are different types of questions that we started asking. So I've been thinking about leveraging those original applications for new things. In a way, as a researcher, we've done that continuously. So it's just the latest iteration in that process.
Certainly certainly seems like you've nailed the full life cycle from research to analysis to applying the appropriate knowledge and gleaming out the answer that you want. I see from your background that you currently oversee performance measurements for all programs. It'd be worthwhile for our audience if maybe you can explain that in a little more context to our data leaders.
Absolutely. So this goes back to your previous sort of inquiry and question, how did I end up at MercyFirst? Before coming to MercyFirst, I worked on a large-scale research project, a randomized controlled trial in Afghanistan. Don't ask me, how I ended up in Afghanistan.
Right.
Learned pretty quickly that probably that was not the best or the brightest idea, even though I think the mission and the core of that project was absolutely interesting to sort of look at different types of educational programs for girls. And I'm really interested in sort of looking at disproportionality and how to enhance programs and services in a way that creates a great equalizer for everybody in our communities and our society. But obviously the logistics of doing a randomized controlled trial in a high risk environment creates its own different conditions. And I've worked in Sub-Saharan Africa, which has its own conditions, but this was maybe not the best idea. On the other hand, it actually, gave me a perspective as far as how do you do this with really interesting technology. And at that time, we were using satellites, basically piggybacking on military satellites for geolocation data, other types of data that, it's definitely a new approach as far as research, just using technologies that existed there for another application. Like I said, I didn't stay there for too long. I realized pretty quickly that, I definitely like that aspect of sort of, leveraging technology. I got exposure, to different types of systems, and an opportunity came by to, transition back to the area that I was comfortable with is, health and social service sector. So like I said, I've been there for 3 years. And initially when I came in, it was basically, how can we optimize systems? And that's actually a lot of the journey for a lot of health and social service organizations. Yesterday, I attended a conference where one of the speakers basically mentioned that our healthcare expenditures is in the trillions. It's 3 times greater than the German GDP, which is mind-boggling. So if we're putting all of this money, energy, resources, we're not getting the good outcomes that we want for our patients. So throwing money at the problem is not the answer. The answer is, with the resources that you have, what is the best approach to leverage those resources to get the best outcomes? So when I came to MercyFirst, the first thing that I did is that, okay, these are the systems that exist. We need to achieve these outcomes. What do we need to do organizationally to get there? What does the current system look like? Where can we optimize? Number one, where can we tweak? And I always say it's not the purpose of, yes, we have silos, but the silos were created for a reason. That's why the silos are there. And I know kind of when I attend those meetings and conferences where I hear speakers say, just destroy the silos. I don't think that's the best approach. My approach has been more of a collaborative approach. Let's build bridges across those silos. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a reason that those silos are there. You evaluate, does it serve a purpose? And if it doesn't serve a purpose, absolutely, destroy it, dismantle it, put a new, building in place. But if it's a historical building, there's a value there. So in that case, why don't you build a bridge instead of just destroying or retrofit that application to ensure that it comes to an intended purpose? So for me, it's always thinking ahead as far as, what were the systems in place at that point in time, and how can we optimize it, being mindful of culture, cultural practices, and many other things that, come into play during implementation, actual deployment.
You mentioned, and we've actually seen this come up a lot, just to stay on this performance measurements, things like that. You mentioned outcomes, and we're beginning to see the role of the CDO evolve to focus more on outcomes, business outcomes. Would you agree with that? Can you maybe share, is that something that MercyFirst and you are seeing as a movement towards your role from an executive position?
That actually has been part of my role altogether. Outcomes are critical to the business or any sort of business line or the business infrastructure. So, I mean, it's interesting when I was, the senior director of research and the sort of, chief data officer. But if you look at the role of chief data officer, you are a bridge between the business unit, the IT unit, and some of the functions that you're looking at are primarily outcomes, compliance related matters. So that has been baked into the CDO from the beginning, that you have to focus on those business outcomes. You're basically the facilitator to achieve those outcomes. And sometimes those functions fall within the CDO line. Sometimes they fall outside of the CDO line. It really depends on how the organization is structured regarding, if you're responsible for those tasks. In my case, when I joined MercyFirst, I got, instead of wearing one hat, I ended up getting two hats. Our previous person was a lawyer, and I told, our executives that I'm definitely not a lawyer. That's not my area of expertise. My area is in the science, analytics, mathematics area, sprinkled in with lots of public health and mental health, long story and a long journey. But I'm definitely not a lawyer. However, I inherited the chief compliance officer role, the ethics part of it. But I see that a lot of those, facets are being applied to the CDO. So obviously the outcomes, obviously the analytics, and now you see the change from just CDO, so from chief data officer to chief data analytics officer, to chief data analytics and outcomes officers, chief data analytics and ethics officers. But I think each of those components are part of the CDO role. Doesn't matter how the name changes or evolves over time, that those are baked in functions within this scope of work as far as an executive that has to oversee.
Yeah, I think that probably a good way to describe it is that it's not only that the role evolves, but you keep on keeping the stuff that you were chartered with originally. So from a data management perspective, from an analytics perspective, from an ethics perspective, you keep adding to that because they realize that the CDO role is such an important role. And it's amazing to hear that you've traveled so extensively. I'm sure you've got lots of stories.
Lots of stories, but I don't think we're going to delve into those.
No. Some of them are probably, under mission parameters that you can't explain about. But maybe can you give for our audience, are there any kind of projects that you are most excited or proud about? You mentioned obviously research for teenagers, children, girls, things like that. But what are some of the projects that you personally are most excited about?
So everybody now, the new buzzword in the field is artificial intelligence, and everybody's super excited about artificial intelligence, but most people don't have a good understanding, or they have a rudimentary understanding of a lot of these applications. And sometimes if you look under the hood, and I'm like, this is the statistics that I have been doing for many, many years, clustering, k-means, Bayesian algorithms, all of these stuff that are just being reapplied in a different types of approach. So like, as I mentioned prior, is techniques that have been available in the field of statistics or mathematics for a very long time, and even the field of research that we've used in more of an application types of approaches. And now we have different types of, as the computers are, advancing, the technology is advancing, that we could run these applications and combine them in very different ways to come with different types of insights that we can't do, the old traditional research method approach, where it requires a lot of effort, that these new approaches are able to analyze the data at a much greater scale. So if I'm looking at patient records, I could analyze 500 records as a research person, but I need a research person to be able to do that. And if you have an algorithm, you could deploy the algorithm and obviously, run the analysis at a much faster rate without requiring, like a research coordinator to ensure that everything is there. But it doesn't take away on the aspect of interpretation of those results, that once these are set up correctly, then you could get the outcomes that you think you should be getting based on your a priori assumptions and ensure that they're valid and they're correct. So artificial intelligence is definitely like a new area that's pretty hot in, pretty much every field that I've talked to, finance, healthcare, is the application of these applications that I think creates some challenges both in the implementation, interpretation, and the use of these applications.
AI is still is taking over leaps and bounds in a lot of different roles, but you still need a human to interpret the results. So we can't really say that we're going to eliminate the roles of the human experience, because we have this powerful, wonderful thing called the brain, which an emotion, and we can jump to conclusions that a logical process may not be able to do yet. Although I was just interviewing IBM talking about their quantum computing, which may actually reach practical levels out in the field. So amazing innovations. So moving on, you've mentioned you've been with MercyFirst for 3 years. If you can share, what are some of the kind of, maybe it's been the toughest challenge that you've experienced in regards to your role at MercyFirst?
So I'd be any single chief data officer that you would ask, the first thing that maybe they'll tell you or they won't tell you is change management, organizational change management. I think the technologies are there. I could leverage them. Basically, I see them as tools that I could leverage and use in many different ways. But organizations are really tough nuts to crack, including optimizing organizations that have been around for 150 years. There are set ways of doing things. There's a history. There's a culture. So initially when I came in, the first few months, I did basically a lay of the land. And then I'm like, this organization needs a digital transformation. And then one felt like a rock. Digital what, number one? And what are you proposing, number two? And what are all these weird names that you're using? AI, RPA, a lot of different acronyms that got introduced that were not part of the culture or the lingua franca of the organization, because, it was not within their scope of work at that point in time. So I would say change management would be key, number one. So understanding organizationally, what are the priorities of the organization? Who are the key stakeholders and decision makers within the organization that could either make or break your applications or any of your projects? And you need allies. Another thing that I found, especially for me, it was really important to seek allies outside of the organization, that a lot of the data science analytics skills are all over in the ecosystem. So they're not going to lie within your organization. I would be very hard pressed that you're going to have all the data analytics applications, including the staff that has the right skills and expertise in-house. So what I've done is actually looked, and actually my morning meeting was talking to another university with their decision science or data science folks, that I keep saying that, like the CDO role is like a team manager, almost like a coach, like maybe not the NFL, but bringing in identifying the right skills and resources, including the technologies, and then leveraging those to actually achieve operational goals and outcomes. So that means partnering with, likes of Microsoft, partnering with the likes of UiPath, partnering with ASRI. We've done a lot of sort of mapping of COVID and other types of applications, as well as bringing individuals from academia like NYU, Adelphi, University of Pennsylvania, many other universities out there that we're currently collaborating with, and finding a way to have projects that have meaning, but also achieve those outcomes that you intend. So like I said, it's definitely a team partnership, and understanding the ecosystem, but also understanding what's really important to your stakeholders.
You mentioned, a kind of coach or quarterback. Working with the MIT folks, we kind of see the CDO as a conductor. And so he pulls in different resources and directs, and without that conductor, you're just in a mess.
You don't have a symphony.
Yeah, well, exactly. The CDO conductor has got the ability to really make the wonderful music, but also at the same time could, if not done right, create a mess. One of the things we've heard a lot of CDOs talk about, and you mentioned this in the digital transformation, you mentioned this in organizational change management, be it maybe under a different name, we talk about data literacy. And data literacy is something that a lot of CDOs are working on addressing. Can you share if this is something that has come up within MercyFirst and what the current status is?
Absolutely. So data literacy is key. I think with the younger generation, I see my nieces and nephews, they're I don't want to call them digital or technology natives. I think they're just, they're growing up in this, culture
Sure.
of just understanding and using these applications. Or, my nephew is able to figure out things on my phone that I can't figure out. And I'm like, wait a minute, I have a degree in this, and how is it possible?
Been there, done that. Yeah.
So in lots of ways, I think, and we see the differential between older generational gaps, Generational X, the millennials. I'm not sure what generations, after Z, maybe we'll start back with A, or I don't know, or Generation AI, maybe, who knows?
Right.
It could be. So data literacy is absolutely key understanding. I mean, when I came in my role, that my division would create different types of reports. And we would send it out to the business units. And there were a lot of, and I'm like, do you guys have any questions? Or my team would ask them if they had any questions. And most of them, the ones that understood had a lot of questions, and the ones that didn't, basically said, it's all fine. And I'm like, but it's not fine. Did you actually understand what it actually means? And data literacy, it's not just the literacy of understanding the reports, but also understanding the statistics sometimes that we provide as far as outcomes in those reports, and interpreting whatever outcomes or data that we provide in what's called data-driven decision making. So I think that component still needs to be worked at. And the only way to do that is actually to have an enterprise-wide education system where they take a slice of whatever is important for that business unit. If it's for financials, then they're looking at a problem within their division and trying to understand, if they have new insights, how do these new insight or this new surface data fit within that, paradigm regarding what they know, and based on what the new information is actually feeding. Does it support their paradigm, or does it throw their paradigm out of the water? And how do you, kind of figure out if that works or doesn't work? And the only way to do that is actually to train your frontline staff to ask those inquisitive questions related to the reports that are being provided, or the insights, or anything that's being surfaced within the dashboard and the aggregate data. So it's cogent question that actually delves deeper into, what is really happening here? Is this correct? Or is this just a spurious effect based on just, aggregation of data? And that actually helps us, down the line to sort of look at how the data gets collected, going back to the research part. The way you collect it, the way you clean it, the way you organize it, it's what your output will look like on the other end. So, I mean, you've heard of GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. Yep. In the computer science field. I started off as electrical engineering. That was the first thing I learned. I had no idea what it was. I thought it was some sort of gum or some,
Still true today, and even in AI, garbage in, garbage out. Right.
And we've seen that, that you could have these applications come up with different types of solutions. But as you said, the human in the middle is absolutely key, the interpretation of this information. Mm-hmm. So it's not just teaching folks, basic statistics 101, which in our social service and healthcare service, you'll have doctors and physicians running out the door saying, they have to teach them how to do stats 101, understand regression and means. That's not their area. For us is actually to create reports in a way that's palatable to them, but also bite-sized that helps them think about processes as far as patient health and well-being in an aggregate level that shows patterns within the population or patterns within an individual that they can help them integrate into their sort of clinical decision-making to ensure that that patient has a better transitory approach to our outcomes.
I think that there's, every interview we do, we often get, nuggets that just come out. And one of the nuggets you just mentioned here on this particular one is that organizations need to have an enterprise-wide educational approach to data literacy, which is definitely something we want to see. I will, just looking at time, we'll have one last question. We normally don't like to ask this question because it dates the recording, but just being the fact that MercyFirst is based in New York, which, like a lot of large cities, has experienced some dramatic changes and challenges over the past 8 months due to the pandemic. In your opinion, how has the pandemic impacted your role at MercyFirst?
So this is a really interesting question. I think initially when I came in, my data science projects, including analytics, we're on a trajectory. I would call it like a steady train. And then COVID hit, and then I ended up jumping on the bullet train. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, from the steady Amtrak train to a bullet train. I didn't expect that. What happened is that a lot of my projects got signed off on and ended up going on a really fast track. So my digital transformation started zooming into the stratosphere, and I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't even ready for that, number one. It's definitely a positive change that there's a sort of a greater adoption of technologies across the board in multiple different types of sectors. So you have little kids on Zoom, and then you have grandmas, grandpas on Zoom, like my mom and dad. They're like, how do you use Viber and all of this, which would have never happened in a million years if we didn't have this pandemic. So I look at a pandemic as, yes, it is, a public health, large scale epidemic, but yes, that our way of life is changing, but there's also opportunities, that we're learning different ways. And technology is actually at the center of this process. It allows us for social interaction, so we're not completely socially disconnected, even though we have to maintain social distancing measures, number one. But number two, it actually fosters our ability to continue work. The only other thing that I worry, there are communities that are disproportionately affected, number one, and they don't have the same type of access to technologies, number two, that in a way, I think technology has to be the great leveler and also an opportunity to take some of these applications and actually apply it to sectors that wouldn't have those opportunities.
That is great. And I totally agree with you. We need to obviously help those that need help in becoming much more ingrained in the digital highway. So, Bessa, I'd really like to thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it. We hope that we get a chance to come back and talk about these things in the future. So many thanks indeed for your time.
Thank you, Robert. It was a pleasure talking to everyone, your audience, and hopefully they're, next year or the year after, we'll be in a different types of trajectory. Who knows?
We certainly hope so. Thank you. And for our listeners, please visit CDO Magazine for additional interviews. Thank you.